Welcome to Liberty Explained, your guide to libertarianism. Our goal is to share libertarian solutions for the future. Visit libertyexplained.com to subscribe to the podcast and to search our library of issues and different book recommendations. We are part of the We Are Libertarians podcast network. My name is Chris Spangle. My co-host is Julia Geyer. Thank you so much for being here, Julia.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And so we're always taking your questions, and if you want to write in, ask at wearelibertarians.com. And today's question is, what would education look like in a libertarian society? This is a popular question. We got this kind of question a lot. And I would like to start by prefacing, Julia, that as with everything we discuss on this program, we're not talking about a utopian vision of education. We don't talk about the utopian ideas a lot of times. We try to give you actionable, progressible solutions. We're progressing towards liberty. We're anti-progressives, I guess. Every effort involved in education. So this is a really important thing. There's a distinction. There's a book by Thomas Sowell called The Conflict of Visions. There's the one group of people who think that they can perfect human behavior through laws. And then there's libertarians who think, let's craft laws and systems around human nature because we can't change human beings fundamentally. So even in a libertarian educational system, a libertarian medical system, a libertarian political system, you're still dealing with human beings that are flawed. Human beings are flawed. They have bad decision-making. What we strive for here on Liberty Explained is optimal outcomes for people like students and teachers. So it's hard for one person to predict how education would unfold once the monopoly of government schooling is lifted, because markets empower millions of individuals to collaborate using their talents. Somebody out there, Julia's a model for a living. I don't have that ability, but I'm so glad that people like Julia out there can do it, right? Somebody wakes up every morning and thinks, I'm going to be the best darn turnip grower this planet has ever seen. I don't know anything about growing turnips, but that combined collaboration of all of our different talents creates something incredible, and one mind is less adequate than a million minds. And so this powerful creative opportunity is at the heart of the libertarian schooling model. School choice allows the system that was created 150 years ago to create good working robots is outdated, and people like teachers unions often fight to keep those systems in place and restrict the amount of innovation that we could have. So despite opposing government schools, we're not anti-school in any way, shape, or form. We're pro-teacher, we're pro-education, we're pro-parent. And libertarians believe a new way of educating students must flourish in the internet age. Rote memorization, Julia, just isn't adequate for knowledge work. You know, we are both gig workers. You know, we need skills like critical thinking, problem solving, and a structure that supports self-discipline, as opposed to just like, you know, reading these books and memorizing dates. We've got to get out of the mindset of the old way of educating.
It just seems so dated at this point. Like you and I are like in our 30s, like real world just working, and like thinking about like learning like that, and like, God, like I feel like the skills I came out of school with, like I didn't have any skills. None. I don't sit at 8 hours in a single place anymore. And that was the point of attaching a child to a desk, is to get them used to sitting and learning. I mean, you and I are like dynamic through our day. Let's go do this. You know, we have a lot of choice. There's a lot of, and that's where the world of work is going. So, I mean, if you would, like, well, let's define education. Like, what are we talking about when we talk about education? Well, we often think of it as like sitting in a classroom for 8 hours a day, like you said, like in a physical building. But you know, education is really the expansion of an individual's mind. And if the old way of education produces no real growth in understanding for a person, then it really can't be considered education. We libertarians firmly believe that every individual is a genius at something. And we talk about that a lot. And I really do believe that in my heart. I think that every person is born with a gift and something that they're talented at and something that they're really meant for, and our goal is to empower parents to help their children excel at their natural abilities that they're born with. And, like imposing the traditional sit in chair for hours on end and listen to a lecture and read this textbook model, it really handicaps the creativity of both the teacher and the student. And like, I can personally attest to this because I had a terrible time in school when I was young because I was so creative and I had so much energy and I wanted to do so much. And I've never been like a worker bee, like someone
Right.
who's like doing the 9 to 5 thing. Like I just don't function like that. And I am highly creative. I'm an artist and I like getting my hands into things and I love making money and I love business, but public school was so terrible for me because I just felt like they were just trying to break my soul. And I was like, you're not going to break my soul.
Yeah.
And I fought them like the whole way. And it was just like really hard. And like, I'm a self-starter and I am someone who I start businesses and I love to be an entrepreneur. And I think that our society desperately needs people like that. And a public school education is a lot of the time really damaging.
Yeah, it's a way to, I mean, for some people it is about breaking the spirit and introducing the idea of submission. And, if you look at the traditional model of schooling, it was meant to create worker bees. It was meant to, for a time when people would go and work at the same company for 30 years, as opposed to, now I love school. I had a great schooling experience. I'm a nerd. I like systems, so I found a lot of it to be beneficial, but I also was not very self-disciplined as a student, and there wasn't really much help in that except just do it. There wasn't like,
that's true.
Let's work with how you work and figure out that way, or let's adapt the model to a Julia and see how we can get her to learn better. And the internet gives us a model for innovation. And I will say, we have in Indiana a lot of great schools. So, the IPS system, my nieces go to something called a magnet school, and they go to like a STEM school. And essentially what happened, like the Friedman Foundation is based here, the Lumina Foundation, all these big educational choice foundations are located here. And so for 20, 30 years, Indianapolis has been kind of an incubator of school choice ideas. And IPS was very broken, like most, inner city school systems. People moved to the suburbs, like my parents went to Plainfield because that had great school systems, and would never have thought of sending us to IPS. My sister was a teacher, was never going to send her kids to IPS. But a Democratic mayor introduced charter schools to the city of Indianapolis, and the competition forced IPS to reform itself, introduce like the magnet school concepts. One of the schools is an art-based system that you would thrive in. One of them is a vocational based where, you have a lot of different choices. And so now a lot of teachers who are kind of look at what the teachers union say, don't like charter schools. Oh, they don't pay as well. Yes and no. You have more choice as to where you can go. You have more choice where you can send your kids. You have different models being taught in some of these schools. And then when you look at the pandemic, Julia, and you talk about innovation on the internet, with these cheap and low barrier to entry, thanks to little government inference, look at the rapid innovation and change and adoption that we've had over the last couple of years. I mean, I don't know about you, but on my feed, I've seen, teaching pods and different ways to homeschool and unschool and, Montessori style.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable the different ways that you can now educate your child if you want to go that route, thanks to the pandemic forcing everybody to kind of like listen to the way that their kid was being taught and find better models.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, actually. Like, I feel like that's one of the silver linings that came out of lockdown was that for the first time, like, I think parents actually really got involved in like understanding, what their kids were going through at school, what their experience was. And they cared more. They care more now. And I like that. I think that's amazing. And we saw it across the board. Like, so many kids are just like alternative learning now. And I think that's a step in the right direction. I think it's progress.
I do too. And, now what are we going to learn in like a libertarian school? Are you just going to read Ayn Rand every day and, crypto 1 hour, hating the government the next?
Oh man, this sounds so good.
And if I were a libertarian emperor and I were creating education, from a broad view, K through 12 schools might not look that much different than they do now in terms of the subjects taught. The difference will come in smaller classroom sizes, more options for schools closer to parents, happier teachers that earn more based on effort and skill, and a greater selection in curriculums and teaching methods. One of the worst parts that I've watched teachers struggle with over the last few years is their inability to teach, because they're teaching to a test, they're teaching to a method the administration wants, they're teaching to keep angry parents off their back, and they're not really being able to teach in the way that these are skilled people who deserve to teach the way that they want. And the classic liberal arts education will still be relevant despite an emphasis on specialization. So things like reading, arithmetic, writing, rhetoric, all the classic liberal things, math, social studies, they're still relevant because exposure to, understanding, and mastering the broad spectrum of human knowledge enriches the life and potential of students while helping them learn where their emphasis might be placed. So, while a person may not be proficient in math, English, history, or science, it's still beneficial to a growing brain to make sure. So when we talk about specialization, we're not necessarily talking about neglecting all the different varieties of subjects that you need to learn.
No, not at all. And I think it's like important to stress the point that I think so many people, like when they talk about education, exploring it from a libertarian perspective, they really focus on what is the student's experience. But I think it's so relevant to talk about what is the teacher's experience, because like you just said, it really hinders the teachers. And I think obviously the kids miss out on a lot of wisdom and education that they could be getting from all kinds of wonderful people that could be teaching, but the teachers are limited to what they can teach. And I don't think that's productive as a society.
Well, it turns out when you have 435 bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. plan out curriculum across the country, it doesn't work as well as highly individualization, where communities are working together amongst teachers, parents, administrators to craft what they're going to teach, what they're going to vet. So moving towards centralization has not been good for education over these last 10, 20 years.
No, it's been very narrowing. And, I don't know. I think in a libertarian style of education, like parents, teachers, and administrators would work together and they would adapt their educational style and curriculum toward meeting the needs of like the student and the community at large, like you just said. So
yeah, I mean, a great example of this. So I did a public affairs radio show called Now Hear This, and I talked to the Hope Academy, and it's a charter school here in Indianapolis that serves teens struggling with addiction. And the high school serves basically as a safe place for students to grow, intellectually and personally. And they have specialized programs for students that are dealing with alcohol and drug addiction or other types of addiction. And you have a mix of counseling along with, your traditional science and math and English. And that's a sort of a great example of what we're talking about, is that specialization that meets the student
it's
where
very
they're at.
Niche, like that student, it meets those students' needs. And they could have that for the charter schools, like you were saying, they could have it for artistic students or students that are really scientific or really math brained, or, like there's so many different types, or really entrepreneurial, or
Yeah.
really high energy. Like, I don't know, like if we had an open educational system that was just like functioned like a free market, I think it would be so exciting to see what would come up from that, because it would be amazing.
Yeah, one movement across the country is money following the students. And so instead of basically IPS sends out vans to collect students for the first 2 weeks of school. That might be truant, because they need to get the amount of students that they have in the first 2 weeks is the amount of money that will be given to that particular school for the rest of the year. As opposed to money basically being put into a sort of trust for parents, them choosing where they want to send their kids, and then that money goes to a private school, a charter school, a magnet school, a public school. If my parents had their way, they wouldn't have sent me anywhere other than Plainfield High School. It was a great education. It was a great public school system. My sister lives in Indianapolis, and she sends her kids to IPS by choice. But for those who live in areas where the education isn't as, optimal, then let's fund the schools that are doing it right and make it, put parents in charge of decisions as to where their kids go, as opposed to geography. That's another thing that Indianapolis has done, is they kind of made it a lottery and blown up the geography. You're going to the school around the corner. One other aspect of the libertarian view of education, students would not be required to go to school. Now, this is controversial, Julia. Everybody's face kind of puckered. But the reality is most kids want to go to school, and most parents want to send their kids to school. And according to Mary Ruward's book, Short Answers to Tough Questions, a survey was done in Boston in the early 1800s, and 90% of parents sent their children to school. And that's when you weren't forced to go to school. Non-compulsory education improves the performance of classrooms by removing the students that don't want to attend. Disruptions prevent barriers to entry. So like many ideas offered by pro-government voices, truancy laws are a security blanket that helps them feel as if they've done something good. But in reality, if a student does not want to attend school, they won't even go under our current laws.
They don't.
And like I said, they have the vans picking up for 2 weeks, but after 2 weeks, they don't care. Peace.
And, I think actually this really hurts low income families the most, because when a child is, not going to school and they're breaking truancy laws, it forces the parents to miss a day at work, go to court, chase their kids around. I mean, they're already having a hard time with their teen at home, and then they get the courts involved. And I feel like it criminalizes these kids in a way. And it's wrong
parents.
And the parents too, I'm sure a lot of parents are listening to this that have teens, and we all know you really can't control teenagers. Like, they're kind of wild, like a lot of them are just, especially the ones that don't want to go to school, they're not going to school.
Are you speaking from experience here?
Yeah. And a lot of my friends too, like we all just were like, no. So, I just think that it's wrong to criminalize that. And I think that an ideal alternative would be to have other options in a free market, education system, where a student like me, when I was young, I was high energy, creative, wanted to work, wanted to create, build. I didn't want to sit and be drilled to about boring history and wars. I was just like, oh my God, I'm wasting my brain. So, if there could be a school for kids like that maybe they don't just not want to go to school, maybe they want to do something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. It's just a waste of their time to prevent them from doing something else.
Yeah. So, I mean, who doesn't love freedom? Who doesn't love choice? Right? So hopefully we've convinced you. Thank you so much for listening today. I want to thank Julia for being here. Thank you to the folks who wrote in and asked this question. And we'd love to hear whatever questions you might have, so please email us at ask@wearelibertarians.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share it with a friend or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. And we will see you again in just a couple weeks.